Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. First of all, I would like to call the order of the October 7 meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee. And we're going to go ahead and do a roll call, please.
Obleton. Kiefer, excused. Cooper.
Here.
Lord. Hodges. Rasso Adela. Bird, excused. Holloway. Gilmore.
Here.
R. Johnson.
Here.
Knowles.
Here.
Rasso Allen.
Here.
Patel. Westmoreland. And we have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda will be citizens with ACAC business to address the council. Seeing none, we will move to the next item, which is to welcome our new CAC member, Jessica Knowles. If we can go around and kind of introduce ourselves and let her know who we are, that would be great. Thank you. Alan, you want to start?
Yeah, so I'm Alan Rasso. I have lived in Davenport for 4 years. I moved here in 2020. Prior to that, I lived in Illinois. And I do enjoy living in Iowa more than Illinois. I'll just state that for the record. I work at 3M. I've worked there for 13 years. Started there in 2011. And currently I'm married, have 2 kids, 9 and 10, and I coach travel baseball. I coach year round, so that usually consumes most of my time.
And then we'll come back. Alrighty, I'm Reagan Johnson. So I've been in the Quad Cities for 20 years. I'm a realtor with Rural and Rural. I raised a daughter here. She's a proud Central Blue Devil. And I've been on the CAC now for, I think, 6-ish years, maybe. We do good work. These are good people.
Hi, my name's Dale Gilmore. I've born and raised in Davenport a long time ago. My wife and I just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary a week ago, so I'm kind of a political junkie. Jessica will tell you sit right there, at all the meetings. Yeah. And I think I've been on the CAC maybe 6 years. I don't know. Okay, whatever. I enjoy being here, and it's a lot of fun, and you'll learn a lot about where our money goes, where the government's money goes.
Okay, my name is Adela Rasso. I think I've been in the CAC committee maybe 2-3 years now. This is actually my first time doing this, so if I mess it up, sorry. So I currently work for the city of Moline, Illinois. I work in the community and economic development for about 4 years, and then I move over to the public works side. So that's where I kind of learned some of these things. I guess I love being able to have a little input on where the money gets spent and have a little impact in the community by, giving your time. I have 2 little kids, my husband, and we're extremely busy all the time. So do not hesitate to ask questions, as most of us here probably, well, not most. These guys have been here around for a while, but I know Alan and myself probably are the newest ones here, and her down there. So thank you.
I'm Elizabeth Hodges, and I represent the 4th Ward. I have been on the CAC probably at least 12 years, longer maybe, along with a couple of my partners down here. And there is a lot to learn. It's another avenue of the city, and we do good work. And we've got a good process in place, and questions are always welcomed, and staff is absolutely wonderful to work with. So welcome to our newer members.
Hi, I'm Tammy Lord. I am with the First Ward. I have lived in Davenport since 1984. I'm retired from the Rock Island Arsenal after 36 years. And I've been on here about 12 years also. I think Elizabeth and I both came on about the same time. So.
Alrighty. My name's Cassandra Cooper. I represent Third Ward. I think I've been on this committee 3 years. I work at the University of Iowa. I've been there probably 12 years now. Yeah. And I just, like puttering around in my yard and playing with my cat. And that's about it.
My name is Joseph Obleton. I think I may be one of the older members of the CAC committee at this point.
Seasoned.
Okay, I'm one of the seasoned veterans in this. I've seen the CAC go through different changes. I've seen how we've grown in ways that is very positive to the community. And I've seen a number of very good questions asked at very timely times as we would go through different information. So I think what we do is important, and I think that the community can appreciate it if they've been a part of the process.
I'm Jessica Knowles. I have been in Davenport for 34 years. I have 2 biological children, but I also have 3 that have kind of came under my wing. I've been working in the homeless community for about 16 years, my daughter's whole life. I have just recently found out that I will be a grandma coming in May.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, and welcome, Jessica. Next item is to review and approve the minutes from the July 1st, 2024 meeting.
Oh, wait. I would like to move that the minutes get accepted as presented.
Second.
Not sure who said it first, but both of them second. All right, you guys got that? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. The next item on the agenda is to review and accept the financial report through June. Heather?
So I just did want to point out, this is the final financial report. This is the earliest we've gotten it in the last 3 years. So kudos to our finance department for moving through that so quickly to close out the year. All of the nonprofit public service agencies did spend down all of their money with the exception of Family Resources. And once again, when they have a staff change very close to the end of the fiscal year, it's very hard for them to be able to roll that money into a different position quick enough or get that position filled fast enough. So it wasn't a shortfall for any other reason that they had a very poorly timed late in the year staff vacancy. So this is the first time they've left money on the table, and this is the last 2 years they were able to spend it all down. But this year, just because of a vacancy, they weren't able to get through all of that funding. And just as a reminder for our existing members and information for new members, when, with the nonprofit agencies, the contracts, the agreements that they sign are for 1 year. And the reason for that is because the city is guaranteed to get money from HUD every year, but the amount the city will receive is not guaranteed. And so we aren't able to sign multi-year agreements for funding that we don't have certainty of the amount or the timing of when it will be received. So when an agency reaches June 30th each year, those nonprofit agencies, if they have not spent down all of their money, that funding, that agreement ends and the funding comes back to the city for a process called reprogramming. And in the reprogramming process, the funding that is left over from nonprofit agencies and admin lines goes into kind of a mini allocation cycle where the CAC will make a recommendation to City Council on how that funding should be used. And that process we will take care of in November at the November meeting.
All right, was that, okay, so now do we take a vote?
Yes, you'd want to get a motion and a second and a vote.
Okay.
I would motion to approve the financial report.
Anybody would like to second?
I'll second.
All right, everybody in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. All opposed? All right. The next item on the agenda is the year 51 local activities.
Okay, I always like to take a moment at each meeting when we have these action items to kind of orient everyone of where we are in the year. Each year, the city is required to submit an annual action plan to HUD for how the funding will be used. That plan is due in the end of May every year. We have to submit that to HUD towards the end of May. But that is kind of the final product of the planning process, and the actual planning that goes into that report, that plan due in May, starts in July of the year before. And so in order to get to that May date, we have to count backwards and say, if the report is due in May, then we have to do our allocation process in March. And to do the allocation process in March, we have to have applications due in January. And to have applications due in January, we have to have an application workshop in December. And to have an application workshop in December, we have to have the application developed in November. And in the application is something called local objectives, which are kind of the goals for the funding for the year. And those local objectives are decided in the CAC in October, but those are based on public input and a review of data that takes place over the summer. So in July, at the July 1st meeting, we talked about the public input process and what would go into that. That process took place over August and September of this year. And we have that summarized here for you in the local objectives action items. So those local objectives should be the summary of not just the survey that was done and not just the public input meetings that are done, but also a look at some studies that HUD requires that the city has. We have something called an analysis of impediments to fair housing, which is a study that was done by a consultant, and it's done every 5 years. And that looks at housing opportunities for protected classes, which include race, ethnicity, disability status, presence or absence of children. And that document helps to say what obstacles there may be for fair housing in Davenport for those protected classes. We also have a document that's called a housing needs assessment. And that document is a study done by a consultant that says what types of housing needs do people have based on income. So it doesn't look at race, ethnicity, or protected class status. It looks at the income of the people that live in Davenport and what housing needs they have. What units do we have potentially too many of? What units do we have too few of? What hurdles do they face in getting affordable housing versus fair housing under the fair housing laws, which is what the analysis of impediments look at. So they're two very similar documents, but they're very different in what their focus is. One focuses on the protected class status, and one focuses on income regardless of whether you're a protected class or not. And then also HUD requires that we look at a couple of data points that they pull out from us from the US Census, American Community Survey, which is done every 5 years as well, and something called CHAS, which is Community Housing Affordability Strategy. And that is a data set that HUD generates that talks about affordable housing, the affordability of housing and the quality of housing, which are things that HUD itself focuses closely on. And so in your action item, the last page of your packet is kind of a table. I give you sort of a narrative summary in the action item itself, where we talk about some of the highlights of the data from the survey, from the meetings, from the data from the studies and the census. But then the table, if you look, you have 4 columns, and the information in the boxes under each column is from the data source listed at the top. So the first column are data points of interest from the American Community Survey and the CHAS study that HUD does. The second column are the recommendations from the analysis of impediments to fair housing that was carried out by a consultant. The third column is the recommendations from the housing needs assessment, also carried out by a consultant. And then the last column is the community input results, just highlights of the data that came out of the survey that was conducted and the public input meetings that were held. I do want to take a moment and just remind those of you who were here at the July meeting that we opted, the cities of Moline, Rock Island, and Davenport, all 3 cities received community development block grant funding from HUD. We're the only 3 cities in the Quad Cities that do receive that funding. And so as a result, we have very similar requirements that we have to follow, and we have opted to partner together on a number of these studies and input opportunities because it saves money. Getting these studies conducted is very expensive, and when the 3 cities split the cost, it's much more affordable for the 3 cities to do it. So the analysis of impediments to fair housing was carried out in partnership with the 3 cities. It was carried out last in 2019. We are in the process of updating that right now, again, in partnership with each other. The housing needs assessment was last done in 2020 by the 3 cities. We are in the process of getting that updated now. We expect that the draft of those documents will be due in November or December of this year. So it won't be in time to weigh in on the local objectives for this year, but we will incorporate the recommendations into the plan that goes in May, and then we'll use them for local objectives next year. So for the time being, we're using the documents that are in existence at the moment. And then the community input results, this is the first time we've done these studies, the analysis of impediments and the housing needs assessment. We've done the studies in conjunction with the other 2 cities for at least 3 cycles, so that's 15 years. That's a long time. That's a great partnership. It's worked for all of us. But for the first time ever, we did our annual community input survey in conjunction with the cities of Moline and Rock Island. And so we all use the same format. We did an online survey and in paper and in person. And we were able to collect those results and distribute them by zip code. We made zip code a required field. So we were able to sort out which ones belong to Rock Island, which one belongs to Moline, and which one belongs to Davenport. And we think that that worked pretty well. I think we plan to continue to do that. Going forward. I think it cuts down on survey fatigue. So sometimes people, they see a lot of surveys and they kind of ignore them. And so if we're all trying to get the same information all at once, especially because our timing of our annual plans is the same, it might be good to kind of be singing from the same hymnal in that sense. So the results are before you. That's kind of how we got here through this public input process. Now, the CAC's role is a recommendation body. And so HUD doesn't expect or require that, the public is necessarily saying, we're looking at 30,000-foot stuff here. These are themes. It's very difficult, I think. Sometimes there's stress about saying, well, survey, we only got a few hundred responses. How can you draw a conclusion from that for the whole city? And the answer I always give back is it's not just the survey we're looking at. You're looking for themes across all of these columns. You're looking for similar themes from the census, from HUD's CHAS study, from our analysis of impediments, from our housing needs assessment, from our input survey and our input meetings. You're looking for themes. What are you hearing again and again that is needed? And taking those and making those part of your planning process and goals to use the money for. And then the other thing I always remind everyone, and this group has always been very knowledgeable about this, but HUD has requirements of what the money can be spent on. So regardless of what someone may turn up at a meeting or turn in a survey asking for, if you're asking for, a marina, we can't build a marina with CDBG, that's like the stereotypical thing that everybody always uses as an example. There aren't a lot of Lomond people using a marina. And so whatever it is that people can turn up at a meeting and say and ask for anything that they would like, but CDBG can only fund things that are eligible and that meet national objectives. And those have to be things that primarily benefit low and moderate income residents and neighborhoods, and that are eligible activities to be carried out with CDBG. So the goal is to craft local objectives that will serve the needs identified through the public input process. We've given you those themes in the document, and then carry those forward so that next year when we're doing the application process and the allocation process, we're doing that with eligible activities at that time.
All right, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank staff, Don and Heather, and everybody who is behind the scenes and putting all these surveys together, and their flexibility on trying to get some of these surveys done. I know myself, it is extremely hard to get sometimes people to participate in those kind of things. So thank you, ladies. All right, so we need to take a motion. And we have a couple options. So the first option will be to utilize the same local objectives as they were used for year 50. If these objectives are still supported by this year's public input meetings and surveys. The second option will be to devise new local objectives for year 51 and align them with this year's public input meeting surveys while still addressing the general areas of need in the 5th year plan. And the third one will be to revise the year 50 local objectives in whole or in part to meet the highest needs as identified by this year's public input meetings and surveys, in keeping with general areas of need in the 5-year plan. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I guess after reviewing everything, I'm just gonna say, before I make, I guess, a motion, I thought it was interesting just that, we're basing, and it's, timing, and we're updating these this year, but it was 2019 and 2020, which is kind of like pre-COVID. And in my real estate experience, I know that it has only gotten crazier and worse since then. And so, being that, it looks like our year 50's objectives started with improving the livability of Davenport's neighborhoods, including, the availability of decent affordable housing. So I would say that definitely, in my mind, needs to stay as number one as our objective. And seeing that as a consistent theme throughout all of the survey. So I would motion to keep the same objectives as year 50, continuing into year 51. I also want to add to that real quickly, just my other thought there, was that also the last objective we had for last year, which was providing support for the human needs of citizens and mental health and all of that. I think housing is a base for that. So, yeah, so I make my motion to maintain year 50 into year 51.
Okay. Okay, Nancy, second. All in favor? Do we need a discussion? Joe?
One thing that was not initially in year 50 is now going to be in what we're doing is that the city council is looking at the rent abatement offer that the amendment that's being passed through is still going through different readings. And that is, I think, an important addition to livability of Davenport housing.
Okay, anybody else? Heather?
I just want to, two things. Address your concern with regards to the timing. You are absolutely correct. Post-COVID, things are a lot different. And so we're doing these studies in partnership with Moline and Rock Island through a consultant, and Moline is the lead agency on that this time. The three cities have rotated that responsibility, and this time it's Moline. And so, we're grateful to them for taking that lead, and the timing is what it is. And I will say the consultants actually have kept much closer to the schedule than I was expecting, because they did promise us documents by the end of this year, and they seem on track to deliver that. So I do expect that we'll have those documents in time to include in our planning document, which will go to HUD. We just won't quite have them in time for the application cycle. So, but in terms of what I can tell you, and I reflected it in the document, in the packet as well, you're right, that pre-COVID and post-COVID, things like rents, incomes, mortgages, speaking from a realtor perspective, they're just, exponentially different. And while we don't have those studies in place to reflect what the kind of lens of those studies, what we do have that has been updated is the American Community Survey census data, the HUD CHAS data, and then our annual public input survey and meetings. And they're all saying the same thing, which is we need all of the things that we needed before, we just need more of it. We need it even more than we needed it before. Affordability has never not been a problem. It's always going to be a problem, but it's just even more of a pinch now. And that goes for homeowners, that goes for renters, that goes for, just not even talking about housing, people in our public service programs, being able to afford activities for their kids, and, seniors being able to afford transportation and things like that. So all of the data that we are able to look at while we wait for those studies to come through are showing we need this stuff, we just need more of it. And I fully expect when those documents come through, they're just gonna, say the need. One thing I will say is we listed out under the recommendations, the needs that will be included in the plan coming up. And it surprised me how much of the comments were very similar to what we had seen before. But with an even more of an emphasis on the quality of housing and the condition of housing versus simply just the affordability of housing. What we found when we did the housing needs assessment 5 years ago was Davenport has a lot of housing that actually is affordable, but it's not in decent, affordable condition. A lot of the housing that is affordable is of lower quality. And so we knew that already. It was already in our documents. It was already talked about. And those comments are even more prevalent in the input that we did just this last, couple of months. And so affordability and the quality of housing have to go hand in hand. And so I expect that our documents will, reflect that even more when we see it. And another thing that we encountered when we did the housing needs assessment last time was this idea or the realization that a lot of the housing that is low quality but is also expensive is expensive because of things like utilities. So when you have households that can't afford to get utilities in their own name, whether they have a credit issue or they have unpaid bills in the past, they are put in the bind of having to rent sometimes lower quality housing, but at a higher cost because the utilities are included, because they're kind of hamstrung by the fact that they can't get utilities. So there are all these ways that affordability and quality go hand in hand in good ways and bad. And so we heard that when we did the housing needs assessment 5 years ago. We heard it even more when we did the public input process this summer. And we did attend the public input sessions for the consultants when they were in town. And so we're using when I am doing these documents for you, I am taking into account not just the things we heard in our public input process for the plan, but the things I'm hearing them say when I'm sitting in the public input meetings for those documents. Even though we don't have the documents yet, I have in my brain and my notes of what we've heard there. So I'm trying to take it into account to the extent I can, even though we don't have the document in hand, so.
Okay, thank you. So the motion that we had on the table was to utilize the same local objectives as were used for year 50. And it was motioned by Ms. Johnson, second by Lord. Are we staying with the same motion?
Okay, I just want to continue discussion, if that's okay, in case anybody else has something they want to add to. And I was just thinking on that note, so I was, same thing, I was thinking you just have to turn on the news, today to know what's going on. But is what Mr. Opelton is talking about something that I guess is not, under the umbrella of what is in our current objectives that we're talking about?
So Joseph, if I'm understanding your reference, you're speaking of the rent abatement ordinance? Okay. So the rent abatement ordinance, if I understand, I'm not directly involved in that discussion, but from what I understand, it's an amendment or a change to the city's code of ordinances that will add additional tools to the toolbox for the neighborhood services department in their enforcement of rental code.
Oh, okay.
And that is a, goal that the city can have. What happens with CDBG doesn't have to be recorded in an ordinance necessarily. From my understanding, there's no funding being requested from CDBG through that process, although that could change in the future. We don't know what applications we'll get until we get them at that time. But I think the key is if the intention is to reuse the local objectives or to affirm, I guess I would put it that way, affirm that the local objectives that were utilized last year are still in need for this year. The first local objective of decent, affordable housing would be encompassed. There would be room under that for anything that might come out in the form of an application from the rent ordinance process, if that makes sense. So if an entity looked at that ordinance and says, okay, we have a rent abatement tool now, but we've thought of this other tool we would like to use and we need some funding for it, and that agency was eligible, they could certainly come and apply for CDBG, and I can see an argument being made that that would fit under the local objective that we have for decent, affordable housing. So it's when we're setting the local objectives, it's about, is there room under these local objectives to do the things that might need to be done? So it's always the balancing act between making them super specific and potentially blocking out some things you might want to do, and making them so general that is there even meaning to them when they're super general? So it's always this balancing act, and the question is, do the ones that have been used, do we affirm that those are striking the right balance between being super specific and super general? Or do we need to tweak and refine them to adjust them, is basically the process here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Byrd?
I just wanted to mention that it fits into the housing situation, and especially given what happened on Main with the building going down. People are concerned about housing and the standards that are being met, and what happens when housing is not kept up to the level it's supposed to. This is supposed to be putting some more teeth in landlord and tenant relationships, where now, as it had been in the past, that the tenant had to pay rent no matter. And with this, if it is passed, it will mean that when the landlord is told that is told that it is substandard and need to be fixed, they are at some point going to be said that at that point the person does not have to pay rent at that location until is brought up to the standard that it's supposed to be at. And that's what I meant by is trying to get us to that standard where when someone is staying in a place that they should assume that if it is below that standard, then there will be some consequences for it not being at that standard.
Okay. All right, so now we proceed with the motion. If there is no any other questions, suggestions?
I just wanted to add along with what he was speaking about with the rent abatement. Also, when a renter's place goes into abatement, he is correct. They do not have to pay any type of rent until the problems are fixed by the landlord. But what is also nice about that too is, say for example, somebody paid their rent on October 1st and they didn't get it, they went into abatement on the 5th. Now, when they go back into November, since that month was already paid for and it didn't go into effect until the 5th, they would only have to pay the 4 days for November. They wouldn't have to pay back the rent that they did not pay for the previous month.
All right, anybody else?
I would just say, I'll just add to that. I think, sounds great. Unfortunately, I wish we had more entities coming to us to solve these problems and asking for money from us to help with these issues. But I guess with that, I would just say my motion stands. I would move that we move forward with year 50's objectives into year 51.
Thank you. Second again by Lord. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, well, thank you. Is there any other businesses to discuss?
Preview of next month. So we will be sending you a draft application in next month's packet. First of the objectives that you have recommended tonight will be forwarded to City Council for consideration the second cycle of October. So it will be not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday. They'll start appearing on the City Council agenda. And assuming that City Council would accept those recommendations and approve them, those objectives will be included in the application. We will send you the draft application with your packet. This would be the time, if you think back to last year, if there were things you wanted to know that you felt you couldn't get from the application, this would be the time to discuss with your colleagues at next month's meeting, and we can still add that. Because we will be doing our application workshop at the end of November, or the first week in December. We have to set the date still, but, and that would be the time when any entity might want to come forward to consider that. And then the other thing that we will be discussing at the November meeting is reprogramming. So we did, as we mentioned, have a little bit of funding that was left over from administrative activities and from the one public service that was unable to spend all of their money this last year. And so we will have a reprogramming process as well. Just the kind of standard. So we will be putting that out for application through the agencies. We have to calculate if there's any room under the public service cap to open that to public service, because as we have talked about before, just because there's money left over from a prior year does not mean that there's room under the public service cap in the current year to fund public services. In the event that there isn't, that would be funding that would be available to economic development, housing, and administrative type of activities. And then the third and final thing that we will discuss in November is, as you may recall, all applicant agencies, funded agencies, have to secure an audit every year. So that audit is due 6 months after the end of the program year, which for most of our agencies ended June 30th, which means that their audit is due by December 30th to us. And we do require that if an agency, for one reason or another, isn't able to get that audit into us by December 30th, that they request an extension from the CAC. Those extension requests are due November 1st. So at the November meeting, if any audit extension requests are received, then we will bring those to the CAC for consideration in November.
Okay, thank you, Heather. All right, it looks like now, with no other businesses to cover, I will entertain the motion to adjourn. If that is okay? All right. Yes, anybody second? Everybody say aye?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?